Hey everyone, it's Stellarnan. For today's DIY tutorial, I'll be decorating this 5x7 photo frame with Koroks from The Legend of Zelda. I modeled these specific Koroks after the ones found in Wind Waker, but I do love the ones in Breath of the Wild as well. Something I really like from Zelda is the creature designs. I just could not pass up making Koroks. They're just so darn cute. I love them. Let's get started, shall we?
For this craft, you'll need these materials: the printed pattern and the reference pieces that you can find in the description down below, a picture frame that's meant for a 5" by 7" photo. You will also need some clay. For this craft, I used about 5/16 or just over 0.3 of a pound of original Sculpey baking clay. If it makes it easier, you should be fine with rounding it up to half a pound of clay to be on the safe side.
Some glaze for the clay, an assortment of paints that closely match or can be mixed to match the color reference images, a couple of small paintbrushes and a cup of water for changing paints, wax paper, which is very handy for protecting your work surface and to keep it from potentially sticking to it as well. Yeah, I'm always eager for an easier cleanup. A small pair of scissors, some E6000 glue, a rolling pin, or something similar that can be used to flatten the clay evenly. I actually use a small can of spray adhesive as my own makeshift rolling pin. An X-Acto knife, a cutting board, or a similar surface that's okay to use an X-Acto knife on, and a ruler to measure the height of the flattened clay, which will be between 1/8 to 2/8 of an inch thick. And don't worry, if you're following along, I'll point out this measurement again later.
Optionally, you can use a strip of moss that's the same width as your photo frame and has a height that's about the same thickness as your frame's border. For the photo frame that I used, that came out to be 6 5/16 inches by 7/8 of an inch. Yahaha! Let's jump into it. Find the Korok patterns where the bodies and faces are separated and cut them out. With the rolling pin, flatten the clay. Using a ruler, measure and ensure the height of the flattened clay is between 1/8 and 2/8 of an inch thick. Take each Korok body and corresponding head and place them on the clay. Lightly press these pieces of paper into the clay so they shift around less. Using an X-Acto knife, carefully cut out the pieces by tracing around the outlines. When trimming clay off with the X-Acto knife, you won't need that much pressure. Applying too much will actually cut through your wax paper. If you do that on accident, it's okay. Just cut out or use a scrap piece to patch the tear with some Scotch tape. Also, much like when cutting sugar cookies out of dough, cut out the Koroks from the edge of your flattened clay. Then take any extra small bits and combine them back into the flattened clay. Maybe I'll have to try making Korok sugar cookies sometime, eh? The Koroks in this craft have purposely flat bodies instead of chubby round ones, for the sole purpose of it being easier to glue them more flush to the also flat picture frame. But this doesn't mean you can't give them the illusion of being round and chubby anyway. Due to being cut out with an X-Acto knife, the Koroks have sharp 90-degree angled edges on the outside of their bodies and faces. To fix this, carefully round out the edges by patting and smoothing them out with your fingers. And here are all the edges already softened up. Be sure to have your color references handy. For the next step, it's time to add the Koroks' leafy faces to their bodies. To help aid doing this, you'll need to score the clay. Scoring clay is the process of scratching crisscross hatch marks into the surface of both areas of the clay you plan on joining together. Score both the back of the Korok's face and the front of its matching body. Be sure to use the printed reference as a guide to see where to position the faces. Very, very carefully and lightly press the Korok face into its body to attach the pieces together. Basically, pressing them together will push the clay from both pieces into the cuts you made earlier, filling them in. Noses are next. Cut out the noses from each of the Korok head patterns that have noses. Using these pattern pieces as a guide, make small X-Acto knife cuts into the clay to mark where each nose should go. Add tiny cones of clay for each of the noses. Next, use the flat side of the X-Acto knife to smooth down the noses from all sides, attaching them to the Korok bodies. Looking good. Aw yeah, it's baking time. Place the Koroks on the baking pan on a cookie baking sheet liner. For the baking times, always read the back of the clay's packaging and follow its instructions. After they have finished cooking and cooling, it's time to paint. First up, lay down the base coat of tan paint for the Korok bodies and let them dry completely. I personally opted to mix in a slight tinge of yellow in my first layer to get a little bit of a brighter tone for my base coat underneath.
Then apply a second coat of tan paint to really hide that underlying clay color and get the Koroks looking really nice and opaque. Also, don't forget to paint the backs of the Koroks too. For the next few steps, you'll need the Korok reference images to glance at for the remainder of the painting. Next up are the body swirls. Add a tiny droplet of brown paint to your tan base color paint and mix it together. Then, paint the slightly darker swirls onto the bodies. Afterwards, to ensure the Koroks look consistent from a side angle, use the same paint to extend the swirls from the front to the back of the bodies. Once the little Korok bodies are complete, let's add some personality by painting their faces. Paint the main solid colors for each of the corresponding Korok faces. Also, don't forget to paint the sides of the faces as well as the back. Paint an extra layer over the faces as needed for opaqueness. After the base colors for the faces are finished, it's time to work on those tiny details. Very, very carefully, with a small paintbrush, add the leaf veins onto the Korok faces according to the reference images. And here's what the Koroks should look like with all of their veins added. For the last detail on their faces, use black paint to add little eyes, noses, and mouths to bring them to life. For the final touch on the Koroks, paint on a layer of glaze to give them a nice finish. Oh, and don't forget to paint glaze on the backs of all the Koroks as well. Here are the finished Koroks. Grab the photo frame and make sure the easel back is at the bottom. You wouldn't want your craft to be upside down. Be sure to also grab the completed reference image if you'd like to position your Koroks on the frame the same way I did. Using some E6000 glue, combine each Korok onto the picture frame. Because some of the Koroks overlap, start by gluing the ones on the top row and working your way down. The frame looks really nice as is, but as an optional finishing touch, glue a strip of moss to the bottom portion of the frame. I personally like how it adds more of a woodland feel to it. And there you have it, your very own Korok picture frame. Thankfully, you don't have to solve any puzzles to find these little guys. But wouldn't that be something to have to solve a puzzle to take them out of the oven? And you know, you could really make your own custom Koroks. Maybe have some fall leaves or sakura petals, or you could have one for any flower or any season. But I decided to keep it classic. Thank you for watching my video. If you enjoyed it and want to support me, join the Stellar fam by subscribing to my channel. Stay stellar!